On September 25, 2025, the news of Pastor Voddie Baucham Jr.'s death sent shockwaves throughout Christian communities around the world. At just 56 years old, he suffered an emergency medical incident that ended his life suddenly, leaving behind his wife, Bridget, their 9 children and grandchildren. While churches, seminaries, and countless admirers mourned the passing of a man whose preaching and writing had shaped their faith, the deepest sorrow belonged to his family. At the center of that grief stood his wife, Bridget, who for nearly 3 decades had walked beside him as partner, encourager, and friend. The images of Bridget in tears after his passing became a symbol of the immense personal cost behind public ministry. To the world, he had been a preacher, a theologian, and a defender of biblical truth. To her, he had been her husband, her companion since their college years, and the father of their children. The weight of that loss could not be measured by statistics or achievements. It was visible in her brokenness, in the quiet moments when the man she had leaned on was no longer there to share the smallest details of everyday life. For 29 years of marriage, Bridget had carried her share of both joy and struggle. She stood with her husband during his long days of ministry, supporting him as he preached, wrote, and traveled. She rejoiced with him in moments of triumph and stayed steady in moments of difficulty. She was present during his health battles, including his near-death experience in 2021 when he faced heart failure. That crisis had brought their family to its knees in prayer, and Bridget had lived every moment of uncertainty with the hope that he would recover. When he did, she cherished the years that followed, knowing how close they had come to losing him. His death in 2025 reopened those memories and magnified the sorrow of a final goodbye. Those who saw her grief recognized that Bridget's pain was not only for herself, but also for her children. She had to bear the role of a grieving widow, while at the same time comforting sons and daughters who had lost their father. Their family, built on faith and strengthened through adoption and biological bonds, now faced life without the man who had been their anchor. Bridget's tears carried the weight of her children's sorrow, too, as she stepped into the role of holding the family together during their darkest days. The death of a public figure often becomes a story of influence and legacy, but for Bridget, it was a private and deeply personal loss. No headline could capture what it meant to wake up without the man she had shared her life with. No statement could express the silence in their home, the absence at the table, or the missing voice that had guided their family prayers. Her grief was not a performance. It was the human response of a wife who had lost the person who had been part of every decision, every move, and every memory for nearly 3 decades. As tributes poured in from pastors, leaders, and believers across the world, Bridget was reminded that she was not alone in her mourning. Yet, the reality of her sorrow remained uniquely hers. While others remembered sermons, conferences, and books, she remembered the sound of his laughter in their home. While others quoted his words, she remembered the conversations whispered late at night when only the 2 of them were present. While others spoke of his leadership in churches and seminaries, she mourned the man who had been her partner in the ordinary rhythms of family life. Her grief was the grief of a woman who had given her entire adult life to building a home with one man. She had walked with him through the seasons of parenting young children, through the challenges of adoption, and through the joys of seeing their eldest daughter marry and raise children of her own. She had supported his decision to move their family to Zambia in 2015, leaving behind familiarity for the sake of mission. She had lived through culture shock, adjustments, and challenges, standing at his side as they planted churches and trained pastors in a new land. To lose him after all those shared sacrifices left her carrying both the memories and the weight of unfinished dreams. At moments like these, grief is not only about what has been lost, but also about what will never be. Bridget wept, not only for the years they had together, but also for the years they would no longer share. She wept for milestones her husband would not see, for grandchildren he would not hold, for the anniversaries they would no longer celebrate. The finality of death pressed against her with an unbearable heaviness, as she realized that every tomorrow would now be lived without him. Those who know her describe Bridget as a woman of quiet strength, someone who was always present but never sought the spotlight. She preferred to remain behind the scenes while her husband preached and taught. Yet in her grief, the world caught a glimpse of the depth of her devotion. Her tears were not those of weakness, but of love, of loyalty, and of the deep connection that had bound her life to her husband's. They were the tears of a woman who had given everything to her marriage and was now left to walk a path of widowhood. The grief of a wife carries with it a unique loneliness. Friends and family can offer comfort, but no one can replace the bond that death has broken. Bridget's loss was amplified by the public attention surrounding her husband's death. As thousands of strangers wrote tributes and shared memories, she faced the quiet reality that the man they admired was the same man she had loved in the most personal way. The contrast between public honor and private loss made her mourning even more profound. Her sorrow was also tied to her faith. Both she and her husband had built their lives on the belief that death was not the end, but the beginning of eternal life with Christ. In the statements released by Founders Seminary, those words of hope were repeated as comfort. Yet even with that conviction, grief remained real. Faith offered assurance, but it did not erase the pain of separation. Bridget's tears reflected the tension of Christian mourning, hope for eternity and sorrow for the present. Her grief spoke for countless women who have walked the same road, losing a spouse after years of partnership. It was a grief that connected her to widows throughout history and across cultures, a grief that transcends time and place. The image of her weeping reminded others that behind every public leader is a family who bears the cost of loss in ways the world cannot see. Even as tributes to her husband celebrated his books, sermons, and theological impact, Bridget's grief highlighted the truth that legacy begins at home. The tears of his wife revealed the love that had undergirded his ministry. Without their marriage, his ministry would not have looked the same. Without her support, his influence would not have reached as far as it did. Her grief was, in a sense, the most powerful testimony to the man he had been, not only as a pastor or preacher, but as a husband. In the days following his death, Bridget's sorrow continued to be a focal point for many who prayed for her family. Churches around the world mentioned her name in their services, lifting her and her children before God. Friends close to the family described the deep ache she carried and the challenge of facing each new day. The mourning of a widow is not measured in hours or days, but in long stretches of time where absence is felt in every detail. For Bridget, that reality had only just begun. Her grief will remain long after public attention fades. For the world, the loss of Voddie Baucham will be remembered in articles, conferences, and recordings. For his wife, it will be remembered in the silence of her home, in the empty space at the dinner table, and in the milestones she will face without him by her side. Her grief is not a headline but a daily reality, one that will continue to unfold in quiet moments unseen by the public eye. Yet even in her sorrow, Bridget embodies the resilience that comes from a life of faith. Her mourning does not erase the decades of love and partnership she shared with her husband. Instead, it gives testimony to the depth of their bond. The tears she shed were a reflection of love so strong that its absence feels unbearable. In that sense, her grief is also a tribute, an unspoken declaration of the life they built together. For those who saw her tears, the message was clear. This was not only the passing of a pastor. It was the loss of a husband, a father, and a partner. Bridget's grief revealed the heartache of a woman who must now carry on without the man who had walked beside her for most of her life. Her sorrow is both deeply personal and universally understood, resonating with anyone who has ever loved and lost. Bridget's mourning tells the story of love that was real, a marriage that endured, and a faith that will sustain her through the valley of loss. Her grief is the human expression of a sacred bond broken by death, but unbroken in memory and love.